Welcome to the Covering Data podcast, covering guests from the data, development, and IT world. So welcome everyone to the Covering Data podcast. This is Eric Strom with Covering Data Consulting, and with me today is George Bryant with Fulton Analytics. He is a partner and co-founder of Fulton. Welcome, George. Do you have anything that you wanted to kind of tell us about yourself a little bit?
Oh, I could tell you loads of things, but I guess it has to be appropriate, doesn't it? Yeah, so as you said, Robert Garrards and I started Fulton about 4 years ago. And yeah, besides that, I've just been in the data space for a couple of decades in various different forms and ways, all the fun stuff.
Yeah, well that's awesome. Like speaking of, we've both been in the data space for a while. You want to talk a little bit about how you got started, or specifically in data? Like, how'd you get into it?
Honestly, well, when you look back at your life and you look at your childhood and all those things, you kind of start getting an idea of, it makes sense that I've ended up where I am. So way back in the day when you used to have them big old floppy disk computers, there was one program there that you could call it, where you wrote in a set amount of scripts and it gave it a color and it drew the picture for you. You could change the speeds and the size and all those things. But we used to just sort of start messing around with the variables and the numbers, and it will come up with different pictures, different shapes. And just by going through and looking at that was probably really where it started, when I must have been 6 or 7. So having a lot of enjoyment with that. And then I had these little toys where I'd have little competitions and end up making graphs and stuff. And I got 2 older brothers. I was quite roundly bullied by them for this stuff, but such is life in the 80s.
Right.
But really, on the professional side, as I came through to it, I guess I was always aware that I was using data to sort of make decisions. So, back when I was in retail, I'd use a lot of determining bestsellers and finding out. And a lot of what I was doing was going into old stores and sort of saying, well, where are the gaps? What are the issues? And using data and in those days, this is literally just PDF data and paper data, just going through and determining where their gaps were and then going in and helping them sort of bring things back to where they should be. So then when I moved to America, I was aware of all these things, and I was pretty good at working with the data without really being conscious of it. So my first job was at Ameriprise Financial. And so what I did was I was basically just moving things. That was my role. But then there was a toolbar that you could use. So I created the toolbar to mostly do the work for me. And so when someone came in and said, "You here," I thought, well, okay, maybe that was a bit cheeky. Instead, they hired me for their data and IT team. And that in America, in the American sense, is basically where I went from. So from then on, it's just recognizing very early on that Microsoft was the platform that was kind of going somewhere with all this stuff, doubling down on that, and then spending the next 10, 15 years pushing that boat through. So that's where I started, and that's high level where that kind of journey was.
Yeah, it's like kind of funny how you have the aptitude, but you kind of fall into this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I think my first corporate job after I was like had my fingers in repairing PC was actually at a place local here, still open access technology, and I was just doing like little support coding crap, and I ended up like re-indexing and index in SQL Server, and like all of a sudden the light bulb went off. It's like databases.
But it's kind of, it is better that it falls into, because I know people that have had computer science degrees that can't work out a join. But people that, I studied music technology and I didn't plan for this. It just sort of fell into it. And I think the people that are more naturally oriented to these things fall into it rather than force it, because they think, oh, this is a science, because there is just start with artistry. You can have an artist come in and they just have an aptitude to create beauty and something visually astounding to people. Whereas on the data side, I do think there's fundamentally, when you start going more into the hardcore data side, there's a fundamental need for some element of logical way of thinking that just sort of brings that to you, brings you that enjoyment, because you've figured out how to break down this massive structure of millions of things into something formatable and usable. And it's just working through that. I mean, my brother, for example, my brother's got a biology degree, and he works as an insurance person in the steel industry. These things never necessarily correlate. It's how they sort of put themselves together.
Yeah, I hear you on that. So it looks like you had a pretty long career of consulting at different consulting firms and doing a little bit of indie stuff as well. What did you like about consulting versus, like, kind of your FTE work? Do you have any preference either way, or what got you
I
into?
definitely have a preference. Yeah, it's I'm because of my wiring, I have to be engaged. I have to be engaged and challenged constantly. And in a full-time position, that doesn't formulate itself often, especially when you get to the large corporations. And back to Ameriprise, in the same scenario, I was fundamentally a cog in a machine in order to help that machine go. But I was one of 10 cogs. If my cog, in the cog of George Bryant, was to fall off, there's still 9 others, and they'll just put a new cog in. And that frustrated me, because I was made to stay in a lane that I was trying to push out of, and they were just saying, no, that's your lane, don't come out of it. So when I transitioned from there directly into consulting, I think there's a few things that I've learned. One, that I do have the ability to really respond and pivot mentally into various different things, into various different scenarios, and I enjoy that challenge a lot more, and I'm much more suited to it. It also taught me that you always have to stay relevant in those scenarios. You have to learn the latest and greatest tools. You have to push yourself into what all those new things are, because that's what people are looking for in a consultant. I mean, I could go out and find a SQL Server 2008 R2 installation and say, oh, I remember this, I was good at this one, and try and work that through. But what's the point of that? And so being able to pivot and challenge yourself is really just much more how I have to work. Otherwise, I just I drift off, and it doesn't work so well for me.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. When I was doing DBA positions, I kind of hit that 6-month. You learn the environment, you fix the major fires and all that, and then you're kind of like, I know what. and for me, the now what was, I need a new project. You know what I mean? But that's just not how the corporate world works. And you get to drink through the fire hose. You're constantly learning stuff. I mean, if you like that kind of thing, you're constantly learning, and it's kind of fun to, like, just jump into the fire and figure out what's broken and fix it, and make the client happy and bond. There's something to that is a lot of fun.
So one thing I discovered was, I mean, on the data platform side, I think that 6 months can become a bit longer, because there's a lot of different elements and facets to that have to sort of all link together to get your final product, including some of the DBA stuff. But I'm not a DBA. I don't pretend to be. You people just you magically appear, and everything you say is correct, whereas I have to be wrong a few times, and that's different. But what I find is, it's the politics that I try and avoid when it gets to when you've been in a place for long enough. So I've found that the sweet spot for any contract for me, if it's going to get to the longer end, which doesn't happen so much for me personally these days, certainly not since Fulton, is once I get to the 18 to 20 month range, that's when I have to have that sort of cutoff. And as long as I'm challenged throughout that in various different ways, then it's an excellent time. but yes, so I think that I think it does depend on your role and what it is that you're really focusing on. On my side, I've always spanned the gambit of all of those roles when it came to data platform. Since the advent of the cloud, that's not possible because there's just too much. But there's still a lot of things that can change and migrate and evolve through that process. So I think that time frame, should I have a role like that again, is probably where my cutoff would need to be, where I need something new and challenging.
Right. Well, how about speaking of new and challenging, what can you think of, like a project that you worked on that was just like really awesome project? You were doing lots of nice technology, and everything came together. Is there any like highlight projects you'd say through your career that just was really a good experience?
Oh, now I'm lucky. I've been on a lot. The thing with being in my position of Fulton is that I don't necessarily do all the development anymore. I certainly have my hands in the development still, but as a result, I get to see so many different projects and have my hands in so many. But I do think there's two that I always come back to. The one I think is definitely worth highlighting is I used to do work for a manufacturing firm out of Maple Plain, who I can say names, I believe, but Proto Labs, a long while back. It was through a different consulting firm. It's probably about 10 years ago, but we put together a whole data platform from scratch, right into the endpoint of reporting into SSRS at that point, because Power BI hadn't been released. And that was with cubes, and that was with all of these different options that you're allowed to do. So it's full greenfield, soup to nuts, end to end. And I was out there probably for about 20 months in the end. But what was really good about that was that it was the first major end-to-end project that I'd had all by myself. And so the amount of learning I did was significant. But the biggest compliment that I had from that is that even though it was built 10 years ago, last I checked in, which and by all means it's probably gone by now because it should be, because the technology has moved on. After 8 years, it was still being used in its full entirety, and that in itself is a compliment that you can't disregard.
Right.
I think they were working towards a more modern architecture, because at the time it was the modern architecture. But if something's going to be around 8 years after you built it, that for me is probably a great compliment. And I think the people I worked with, the experience I had, and then seeing where that company was and where they are now, that's a huge amount of work. It was my first. It was also my first scenario working with international. Therefore, all of those international pieces, currency, address types. Back in those days, GDPR didn't exist. So I did dodge that bullet, so that was nice. But it was just coming in as I was leaving. So not to say it was for someone else to deal with, but it was for someone else to deal with because my contract had ended and I'd moved on at that point. So, but that was definitely a good time that I had there.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. I was kind of thinking a little bit about excuse me. One of the new architectures that I had first heard it from Robert, but I've heard both of you talk about consumption-based architecture, and I kind of analog it a little bit to kind of I'm really passionate about agile database design. In other words, not trying to design the whole world, especially when you're working with devs that are used to 2 week sprints and stuff like that. But kind of an analog seems to be happening over in the analytical world, and you guys have talked a lot about this. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit about consumption-based architecture and what that is and how you use it.
Absolutely. So for context, so consumption-based architecture is going with the mentality that if you know what it is that you want as your endpoint, i.e. the report, then that gives you the requirements that you need. That means you already know what tables you're going to have to bring in and what queries you need. And therefore you can create your infrastructure behind that based upon that. If you start with, it doesn't matter if you start with one data source or two, it's still the same scenario. It's always easier to start with one. That's definitely the easiest way to go. So start with the one source, determine what it is you want, build out the back end in order to facilitate that. And then that gives you the ability to add a second source and start developing through with some agility. Now, consumption-based architecture itself, for a little bit, the history side of it is it's something that has been possible in its current state ever since pivot charts or Power Pivot came out back in, I think, Excel 2010. Okay. I'm sure there's various forms of how you could do things before that. It wouldn't be as agile as what it is. But it was when Power BI came out that truly became a powerful tool, because you could literally create the report against the data source right there, and then say, okay, well, you can use that. That's a live production report. That took us 2 weeks to do. Here's a report. We're going to go and fill out the infrastructure behind it and help fill out these other pieces so that you can start being additive and add in extra pieces. I think it's definitely worth pointing out that consumption-based architecture now has other names. Someone went out and marketed it up and called it data fabric or data meta. There's various different names of the same thing. And when you read the documentation of what these things actually are, it nearly always comes back to the consumption-based architecture concept, which by all means, I got that name from the same place that Robert Gerrits did, which was we both had the same mentor at different spaces in time, in different scenarios, but our mentor was a fella called Steve Hughes, who I'm sure one day you'll speak to because it's Steve Hughes. And if you don't know his content, not to plug him overly, but Data on Wheels, which is now supported by him and his daughter Christina. But the fact is that he's the one that sort of came up with this concept years ago. Just that Robert and I took that and just moved it along and evolved it in a way which suits Power BI, in a way which suits all the different places we have. Fundamentally, it means you can deliver something quickly, and you can get all of those, you can get some significant pieces in place, and then you can go back and start complementing with all the different departments and really just create that agile iterative piece. Okay, we've got this data here now, we've got this report, what do we want to do next? More data against this report? Excellent. Report builders, end users, self-service, however you want to frame it, they can just go and start creating a report off of that central data set that's there. When it comes to complementing them, by all standards, people will start creating their own requirements. They'll come in and they'll say, okay, well, now I need this data point. Okay, well, that one's in this table that we already have. We'll just make it appear so you can use it. Someone else will come and say, I want this data point. Oh, well, that's a whole new source. Let's do the work to complement it onto the data source. So it gives you the ability to give people freedom to create their own stuff while iteratively adding those extra pieces in an agile and secure way, because it allows you to test each piece as it comes through. It allows you to make sure that there's always, what's the word? There's always, I blank sometimes, I go that way. There's always sort of traction and business happiness, whatever that word is, that can keep people going and keep people adopting. And so that's the other key to it. It's adoption. If you create something, stick it in front of 100 people and say, all right, we've made it, go use it, then people just sort of, great, this is nice, but this part doesn't work for me, and that stuff. You do it piece at a time, you iterate through, you can get the buy-in, you can get the adoption, and that's really the power that it has. And so, yeah, we've definitely taken the phrase and used it. We haven't modernized our naming of it with any of these other, clothing-based data stuff that I hear a lot about, and we just sort of keep pushing it through. And it's been really good for us, and it's been really good for all the clients we've had.
Yeah, I really like that, because we used to joke a while ago about the Bidoof, big design up front, and how long it would take to deliver any type of data product. And a lot of them, like to your point, the client wasn't even sure if they wanted what was delivered after so much time has passed, and the designer maybe made some assumptions, and they just kind of, the divide gets bigger over time as it gets closer to the delivery. So I really do like the way that you guys run those projects, because I kind of accidentally fell into that, having to adjust to how developers were doing things when I was doing data architecture with dev teams over in Digineer. So, instead of designing the whole database, I'd have to design for the feature set. And, it was really tempting to over design and make more, but then I'd end up having this crap that wasn't being used anymore. So, to me, I really get it. And I think it's really nice to be able to have, demonstrate to the client pretty quickly, hey, this is what we have so far, this is what you're asking for, and you can adjust and add from there. So I really like that.
So what's good about it is it doesn't just apply to greenfield implementations. There's what we actually have the ability to do with a lot of the tools that are out there now, like Tabular Editor, DAX Studio, a lot of those things, is that you can look at what's being used in a model, and so we have the scenario where it's not just greenfield stuff. We go in and we review other people's things that have been built, either by other companies or by in-house people themselves, and just sort of have a look at it and say, well, yeah, we can tell you why it's really slow. We can tell you why it's not working very well. And here's a bunch of suggestions on how we can help guide, fix these things up and make it good. And I think one of the biggest scenarios we had was, I think there was one client where they had a very large model. It was pretty monstrous, and it was struggling to develop with. You click a button, you wait, and then you wait a bit more, and then, oh, look, something kind of came up, but it wasn't quite right. So I'll drag it over a little bit. You get the point. And I think end of the day, 85% of that model just wasn't being used. So when we did the review, when we did that analysis, it's to do with the tables. It's to do with the efficiency of the columns that are being utilized. It's about the measures. It's about all of the other layers behind it that can help optimize a model. And so these are all things that we do as standard. They have to be done as standard, really, because it's not just sort of, okay, well, we'll build it, we can always clean it up later. It's like, no, you got to build it right the first time. You've got to build something that eventually, in 10 years' time, that 8-year period that I was mentioning before, and I don't know if it's still being used now, you have to be able to go back to it and say, can it grow for that long? Can it handle the volume that's going to be coming in the future? And if the answer is no, you've not built it right. That's really the simplest way you can put it. You have to put those fundamentals up front first with everything you create. And there are scenarios where it doesn't always work out perfectly. Of course there is. The very definition of a best practice is that you have a best practice if everything behind it is also best practice, and best practice is possible. But it's never really quite possible. Best practice is something in all scenarios that you can push as hard as you can to adhere to, but if you try and force it, you're going to be creating more problems. Best practice is a guideline, and people forget that is a guideline only, and that everything has to be and look and feel this way. It's not possible. There's too many different variations in everything you do in order for that to happen.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I sometimes get a little ruffled under the covers, I guess, when I see this attempt to put best practices in when they clearly don't fit, but it's just like, why is the best practice here? Because that's the way I do it. And then you have the one scenario that doesn't fit the best practice, right? Which is called life, right?
Well, yeah, the concept is that you have to be, if you were to create something and you can't do it to best practice, if I go into your code, and I sit there and say, well, that's not best practice, but I've got no idea why. That's why it's also important for documentation, and in the case of SQL and some of these other things, commenting, because it's like, well, we know best practice is this, but we've done it this way because of this complexity and this variable. A person coming into someone else's code should be able to read that and say, I get it, that's perfect. I don't need to go down a rabbit hole looking as for why this is happening and then try and fix it and then say, oh, that person did it wrong, which, you know, we should be doing that anyway. It's the responsibility should be on the person that created it in the first place to detail why these things are happening, to have the documentation that says, well, of course we tried doing it this way, but, you know, too often I hear people coming to clients, and we hear things from other clients where they come to us and they say, well, you know, this is wrong, or they said this is wrong. And so, okay, well, let's have a look. Well, it's certainly not standard. Do we know why? And too often the answer is, well, no. It's like, well, what's the context? We can't judge this piece of code. We can't judge this model until we understand the context of why it was done that way. If it's done through a bit of naivety because someone's learning, that's fine. It can be fixed. If it's happening for a specific reason and it has to be reviewed, then also fine. But that's easier when people do standard practices such as commenting and good documentation to go with it.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. So one thing I was kind of curious about with with the, you know, the type of projects where you do kind of the iterative delivery of you know, either self-service BI or just reporting in general, like do you have any recommendations for, you know, people maybe thinking to make use of their data, like you know, how do they go about finding, you know, a decent place to do that, or how do you know you're ready to maybe engage an outside vendor for kind of working with your data?
Ooh. Oh, I don't know. So there's two parts to that. I mean, as far as the data, there's two schools of thought that I'm going to probably be off of track for one of them. But so in terms of the technology itself, you know, a lot of people have the data and they know the data, and this is pretty standard for a client interaction. They know what data they've got, they know what they want to see. They're not quite sure how to get it out. They're not quite sure how to visualize it and bring it into these new tools like Power BI that are around. If you're in that scenario, then really the best way of, you can do all the dashboards in the day in the world. You can do all of the things, the trainings, the LinkedIn's, the YouTube trainings, all you like. The only way you're really going to get understanding is to use data that you know and just stick your Power BI on top of it and say, I understand what this data is. Let's see if I can formulate and visualize things that way. Mm-hmm. And so from a tool set side, that's fundamentally what you've got to do. In fact, I've got a very old laptop here. I think it's at least 8 years old, 10 years old. It's been a beauty. It also weighs a ton, and I could fly it through 5 windows in a row if I was fly it hard enough. But I found on it one of the very first Power BI iterations of, it was a West Ham United dashboard that I created very long ago. And I've forgotten all about it, to be quite honest, until I found it on this thing. But when I went through and with the hindsight of what it was at the time, I found that the way I'd modeled it, the way I'd put it together, the labor of love that I went through to create that West Ham United metrics dashboard. And yeah, I even created a social media Facebook site, just coming up with ridiculous stats that people don't generally want to share because they're dumb. And I thought, that's really how I learned how to use this thing. That's ultimately how this thing was put together. But I did it with a data set that I was aware of, because obviously I've followed West Ham since childhood. Soccer team, England. Sorry for anyone that isn't. Right. And so, yeah, do that. Go get your data, stick something on top of it and go with it. As far as engaging someone external, there's two scenarios that always come up. One is, you know, we know what we've got to do. We think we have a fair idea of how to do it. However, we're a lean organization and we just don't have the bandwidth. That's very often times when we get caught upon, and then we can have the conversations of what it is they're thinking, help refine that, come up with some new ideas and see what works, and then say, okay, well, we have the scope, the scope of what we need. Let's go. The other one is people just thinking, you know what, we're falling behind in the industry, or we want to be trendsetters in the industry. Both look very similar, funny enough. And we want to be able to utilize our data to use something else, because either a new CTO, CIO, or CEO, as someone executive side, has come in and said, well, I know what's capable. Let's bring this company forward. Let's do these things. Let's get ahead of the curve. And in those scenarios, you know, they just kind of know. They know they haven't got the knowledge there. They know they've or they have some gaps there, and they want someone to come in and in our case, bit of a shout to us, because I'm allowed to. You know, in our case, it's not just a case of getting up to date. It's getting up to date and learning what these new tools are, how they work, and how to maintain them. Because that education is ultimately what people want, not the. If they knew how to do it, then they'll be doing it themselves. If they can have someone guide them in doing it, and then they can maintain it themselves because they've learned in the process, then that's the power that people want. And so that's why people get engaged, because of those scenarios, and two of many. Mm-hmm. But why people should really sort of stick around is because you need to be able to collaborate. You need to be able to work with people in what they're doing. And one thing that, and I don't know if this is secret sauce or what, but ultimately one thing I always tend to say is that we know technology. People in the data world know technology. You know your databases. I know all the stuff I know. Everyone knows what they know. But those people in the business, they know what they want. They know their data. They know their industry. We're people walking in and complementing their knowledge with our knowledge in order to come up with that. You cannot do a data implementation. You cannot do a project without that fundamental knowledge that they know what you don't, and you know what they don't, or a mix of that. And you have to collaborate and work together in order to get to the end goal. Otherwise, you know, I've made this beautiful report. Oh, great. It looks nice. It does nothing for me because it doesn't actually help me. And vice versa. You need to have that side by side. And without that, things inevitably fail. Yeah. End of the day.
Exactly. You need that partnership, because
yes, partnership. Yeah, that's the one.
Ultimately, they know the data, they know the outcomes, and you know how to get them there. And you know, without the outside consultancy that can kind of help them learn how to create a useful dashboard or whatever it might be, without that, then they're spinning wheels and, you know, losing time to opportunity cost, right? Because everything is so fast nowadays, you know, especially with this tool set. And you know, just getting a little bit of help means the difference between, you know, it could be a couple of quarters before you get something useful. Whereas if you engage an outside resource, you can deliver a lot quicker.
Okay.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about that a little bit. I guess I'm wondering what excites you right now about I mean, there's so much Azure tech out there, and there's, you know, things are constantly changing, and there's a lot of projects. What are you really into right now? What do you enjoy working with when you do have the opportunity to do tech versus leadership?
Oh Lordy. So there was a period back there when Azure first came out where there was new technology and new stuff almost every flipping week, and it's just like, I don't know how to keep up with this. Actually, I think it was the MVP convention where someone, I think they came to the conclusion of, well, you keep releasing things, encouraging us to use it, and then you cut it off, and we've just screwed a client or something. And so now, compared to what it was, actually means that some people can actually focus on things and do a lot of that stuff. I guess from a technology perspective, for me personally, I mean, this may be a crap answer, but ultimately, I like the variety of the data platform things that I sit in, because Data Factory is great. It really does help significantly. And when I think you and I have had personal conversations around SSIS versus Data Factory doesn't crash. I win.
Yeah.
You know, and then, but then that whole complementary set that comes with the SQL stuff, and then into the modeling and I like all of it. Like really, as a complement to each other, you can't have one without the other. I think fundamentally, I think I have been and will continue to be a SQL guy. And so I love coming up with creative solutions with SQL. I love optimizing, and that stuff is always going to be front and center for me because it's just so much more fun. It's you get to get this huge bundles of data and loads of different tables, and you get to say, okay, well, let's figure this out. And you can write statements, you can do comparisons, you can start joining, you can come up with ideas, and all of those things. That's where I think my overall desire to work in data really comes from, because it's that getting a new data set that hasn't been tapped into in order to create analytics and all those things before, or it has, but there's limited knowledge in it. That's where the challenge is, understanding that mapping. And, you know, we always ask the question, well, do you have any data mapping? Do you have any metadata? Do you have any documentation? Sometimes a little part of me just wishes they say, no, we haven't got anything, because then you've got to go figure it out. And that's as frustrating as headbutting a wall can be. Sometimes it's that is the ultimate thing. And I think that was actually where that happened at Proto Labs. They had, actually, I think it was Dynamics CRM, and it was way back in the day before I had ever actually worked with any Dynamics things. I think at this point, I probably worked with at least double figures over and over again in some scenarios. But that first one, they had two people. They had both left. So I was left working out the back-end data set for Microsoft Dynamics 2008, maybe, off the top of the head. I think they eventually migrated to 2010, so it must have been before that. And just figuring it out and getting that stuff away, and then testing with someone on the front end that had no idea who I was, didn't know what I was doing. It's just, is that right? Yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. I'd figured it out. I'd done that stuff, and I'd just thrown a bunch of SQL at it to bring out all the things. So I think there is a load of new tools. There is all the fun stuff, but I still love that bit. As far as the new technology, I love that machine learning and AI and all these other things. And there's a lot of buzzwords about, but so many of them still rely on these same things. You can have your no code, you can have all these other things, you can have your data flows. But, you know, and there's more than one way it's going to get. Doesn't mean SQL is the answer to everything, by all means, not at all.
Right.
But it's still the part I enjoy the most, because it definitely has the most flexibility in order to get things in a way you want it to happen.
I'm still, I don't know if it's old school at this point, but yeah, I love getting into being able to do T-SQL and being able to shred some stuff. I mean, that, you know, I've just been using that for a couple of decades. You know, you kind of
exactly, yeah, and that's it. I mean, there is lots of other things, and I use them, and I'm good with them, and I enjoy them. Mm-hmm. But you know, it's you don't forget your first. I guess, you know, in regards to sandwiches, of course. You know, so it's all good.
Well, so do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what Fulton's sweet spot is, like, as far as what kind of projects that you guys really like doing, and you know, the kind of stuff that you really help clients the most with? I mean, what does a project look like, and that kind of thing?
I think, I mean, there's an ecosystem around a lot of these things, and there's you know, one thing, being a data person that co-found and runs a consulting firm, what I've actually been pretty lucky to see that I think not many others see is there's actually a seasonality to the types of projects that come through at different times, and sort of even the tool sets that get used at those periods, which is quite fascinating in its own way. It's not something I ever thought that you could get true seasonality out of. Sales cycles, yes, they're quite obvious, because of beginning of the year or the end of the year, and you're going to get different things for that. But in terms of the technology being cycling as well, I was surprised. So I think in general, if I generalize it down, then there's a sweet spot around, we enjoy helping that first client, or that a client get to that first series of insights that they've never had before. Now that generally means, so a typical project would look like a bit of data engineering, a lot of Power BI modeling, and a fair amount of visualization and sort of back and forth collaborating to create that first series of reports. Intentionally, that we understand that we're just getting that low hanging fruit. We're bringing business value. That's the word I was looking for earlier. Business value to people in a pretty consistent manner, and we're doing that quickly, and that's the very element of it. And back to the consumption-based architecture piece, then we can complement with additional pieces. We can help build things out. We can train. We can co-develop, and then start just giving those pieces. Ideally, what we really aim for is to get all of people into a great spot where they're able to maintain themselves. End of the day,
right.
Whatever project we do, be it a 2-week, be it a 2-year, the fact is, when we walk away, the client should be able to do everything themselves without us involved. We don't have the business model of we'll keep ourselves needed. That's unnecessary, because people are always going to want to do more. People are always going to be expanding out. But the fact, you don't need to be doing that kind of thing these days. It may mean that we do 8 weeks at one client and then we walk away. But I tell you what, we're going to walk away and they're going to be happy. And the way these things go is, if someone does leave and go elsewhere, or if someone does, they get a new requirement and think, oh, actually, we know who we can think of, or that person that's left, gone to another company, had a positive experience, and away it goes. In fact, to that, we literally had someone contact us. I hadn't spoken to them for 9 years. It was from Product Labs, funny enough, and they said, oh, well, we have this technology. I remember you did that for us. That was what it was. And apparently I was not annoying enough that it caused an alarm bell. So, and these things just repeat themselves and cycle their way through. And so, and this is definitely a message more for people starting out in the industry, is always leave positivity behind you for yourself from a personal brand perspective, and whatever work it is that you do, because it will carry on for the rest of your career. And if you ever do need a job, have people you want to refer to, they're going to come to the people that they have positive experiences with. 5 years, 10 years down the line, doesn't matter, 1 year down the line. And on the same side, when you get into a leadership position or whatever the scenario is, you're going to look back and you're going to say, who do I remember who was competent and polite and good at what they did?
Right.
They're the ones that they're going to call, or you're going to call. Yeah. These things are very important. And so, I think and I'm not an advice giver necessarily for the redundancy of giving advice, but those things are remembered. Though I'm not going to make a meme out of it, but it really is. If you treat people respectfully and you do good work, you are going to be remembered in the times when you need or they need, and that's really important career-wise and life-wise, to be honest. So that's fundamentally exactly what's going to happen. If you're a dick to someone 5 years ago, other people will ask them because they're in a position of power, and they're going to say, "I don't go with them." And as part of our, that's just part of how we should be in life. But it really is, for the career perspective, fundamental 101 for anyone that's asking.
Exactly, and things don't always go well in projects. That's just the nature.
Absolutely not. Of course they don't.
But the thing is, don't burn your bridges, because ultimately you never know where, they might see you as kind of the shining light in a messy project if things don't go well anyhow. So they might all the more think of you again if this is how he handled things when things didn't go well, right? So that's just technology.
Even if it's not the best experience, it's still, you still have to play. It's not even playing a game. It's just basics of life again. But agree.
With you. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground here, and I was kind of hoping that you could talk about a little bit about what you're up to in Fulton, and if somebody does want to reach out to you and or Robert, how would they find you?
FultonAnalytics.com. That's definitely one. We're always very active on LinkedIn, and not just Robert and myself and the company. We have a lot of really cool individuals that work for us. Some of them are really working hard on the LinkedIn side to build up their own brand as well, and we fully encourage them. So Austin Steinmetz, if you want any Power BI pieces, then definitely contact him. DBA work, Eric. There's plenty of people who we work with or we have around us that we just always want to call out as those things. As for what's Fulton doing, we're just happy carrying on doing what we're doing. There's new tool sets coming up, and we're trying to learn those to make sure we're cutting edge. As far as project goes and presentations go, you're going to start seeing us around more and more, because now things are starting to be a little more post-COVID world. We're definitely looking to step up our footprint in the presentation spaces, and that's me in some part. That's a few people who we're encouraging to try and take the first steps into that. I'm very aware that you yourself speak, Eric. We have Jeff Taylor as well. He is down. He runs the Jacksonville SQL Server user group, and so we're just trying to enjoy our work and have a lot of fun. I think the one thing that probably is the most exciting for me personally is that next week I'll be presenting in Tampa at a air medical conference, which is a really fun space for us. We've been having some great partnerships with LifeLink 3 out of Minnesota, and a couple of places over in Utah, and we're just having a lot of fun in that industry, because we've just sort of, we understand that there's a little bit of a gap there, and it's not your generic medical industry pieces either. What we've really found is that some of the things we've created have generally contributed towards saving lives, saving that extra few seconds for someone to get there a bit quicker, all of those things. And I'm not ignorant to the grand scheme of things. They're the ones doing that, not us. But if we're complementing that, and they feel like that they can give us genuine positive vibes around that, then who are we to disregard that? And if we can continue pushing that out and seeing where else we can apply that, that's really absolutely the most exciting thing for me, because too often in data we do come across let's say less exciting data and less exciting data sets and things that are around. So being able to contribute to one that generally makes a difference is a huge thing for me personally. And that some of the sustainability things that we've been doing as well is that may show my character a little more. I think if you ask Robert, his answers are going to incorporate those and have a few others. But from my side, I find great excitement in things that I feel good about, as anyone else would. If you're into motorbikes, then you're going to enjoy the motorbike data, and that's sort of how that stuff comes about. It's just good for me personally.
Yeah, well, I definitely appreciate that, and I can understand why there's so many large insurance companies, and there's a lot of data that when you're working on it, you don't feel that that you're really making that big difference. And so being able to actually get involved in a space that you're like, hell yeah, I'm actually helping. So that's
the data side is
nice.
Still fascinating and cool, but adding that extra layer to it, it's good fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, George, for taking the time to talk with me, and I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks everyone for coming today, and for listening to us chat about data and about Fulton. So with that, I hope everyone has a good day. Thanks. Bye. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening to the Covering Data podcast. If you'd like to learn more about how I can help you with your database needs, check out my website at coveringdata.com or email me at eric@coveringdata.com. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks.